Hello everybody, welcome to this week's SUT, Society for Underwater Technology public webinar. And my theme this week is something a little bit lighter. I'm going to look at underwater technology in television and film from the 1960s until the present day. So not quite as serious as some of our usual subjects, but TV and film in many ways prefigure and inspire real-world marine technologies, the kind of things that we end up using for real. So, of course, if you're talking about fiction in a marine context, you've got to start with Jules Verne. He's, back in the Victorian era, and that book. Okay, I'm going to start again. Hello everybody, welcome to this week's Society for Underwater Technology public webinar. And we're going to look at something a little bit lighter, underwater technology in television and film from the 1960s to the present day. Of course, that's kind of my vintage as well. So naturally, the programs that we'll be focusing on are the things that inspired myself and many of my colleagues in the marine sector. You could argue that you can't really talk about anything to do with fiction and movies in the underwater context without really mentioning the work of Jules Verne. Certainly when Disney did their version of 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea in 1954, and of course even before that there was a 1913 version which used early rebreather technology. But I'm not going to focus on some of those older shows right now. I'm going to look at the ones that came in from the 60s onwards. And likewise, I'm not really going to focus on the documentaries, things like what Cousteau was doing, which were incredible and inspirational programs that really brought many of us into wanting to be marine scientists or engineers or technologists. But for the purpose of today, let's just focus on the more fictional type shows. And in some ways, I think that this guy, Ivan Tors, who was a Hungarian gentleman based in the United States, and perhaps isn't as well remembered as some of his contemporaries like Irwin Allen or Gerry Anderson, yet Ivan Tors was really one of the key producers and entrepreneurs that brought underwater technology to the screen. His series Sea Hunt ran from 1958 through to 1961, 155 episodes. During the first 9 months of its debut, it was #1 in the US TV ratings, attracted half the viewing audience in 50 major cities. He later estimated about 40 million people watched that series weekly. And it also introduced us to Lloyd Bridges, father of Jeff and of Bo, as the former US Navy diver who conducts all manner of adventures during his episodes. He'll be salvaging sunken vessels or sunken aircraft, retrieving bombs down on the seabed, all kinds of different adventures every week. And of course, it's early scuba technology, but it's introducing the public to aqualungs, to the diving gear, the state of the art of the day. And the Ivan Tors studio went on to make other shows like Flipper. Many of us of a certain age will remember Flipper, the intelligent dolphin, and the various adventures, originally a 1963 movie, then a TV series that ran from 1964 to 1967. I still remember the theme music. It runs through my head, one of those earworm things. My Australian friends like to point out that when the New South Wales early TV executives wanted to make a world-beating wildlife adventure program, they thought, well, let's try and do Flipper, but using Australian animals. And the result was Skippy, the bush kangaroo, another fond memory of my childhood. Now, apart from Ivan Tors, the two other big pioneers, certainly of television-based underwater technology, I'd say are Irwin Allen and Gerry Anderson. Irwin Allen brought us Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, along with disaster movies later on, like Poseidon Adventure. And Gerry Anderson, of course, I think the first of his futuristic vehicles that goes diving is probably Supercar. But certainly by the time we get to Stingray and then later Thunderbirds, and even later on UFO, underwater technology becomes quite a significant part of the adventure story, and we'll focus on both the Irwin Allen and the Gerry Anderson stuff next. So, Irwin Allen's Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, originally a 1961 movie, I think starring Walter Pidgeon, with a rather improbable storyline of having to, I think the Earth's Van Allen radiation belts have caught fire, and the experimental submarine Seaview has to head up to the Arctic to fire a nuclear missile into low Earth orbit to extinguish the fire in the radiation belt. So not a particularly scientifically plausible concept, but it introduced the public to nuclear-powered ballistic missile-carrying submarines, albeit with the strange twist that the Seaview wasn't actually a US Navy vessel. I think in either the movie version or the later TV series, which ran from 1964 to 1968, she was basically a privately owned vessel operated by the Nelson Sea Research Institute, Admiral Nelson being the Richard Basehart character on board the submarine. The later seasons introduced the flying sub as well, very much a generic Irwin Allen design of aircraft or spacecraft. You know, he liked to use these rather flying saucer shaped designs. You'll see similar in Lost in Space and Land of the Giants, and usually with the same engine special effects sound as well. The other distinctive feature of the Seaview, of course, was she had windows at the front. I guess what gave her the name. The early episodes, she has 8 windows. These get reduced to 4 in the later series. And we were told that the Nelson Research Institute had invented a very high strength material to enable the use of these viewports right from the start. And the painting on the left there, it's a famous shot from the original movie of the 8-window version of the Seaview broaching in the Arctic before firing her missiles into space. And I've got a clip there from the original black and white TV series. As you can see, she's got plenty of room inside, and they all dress and appear as if they're US Navy characters, but as I mentioned earlier, the submarine is somehow operated by a private sector outfit. In some ways, perhaps that prefigures what happened in the real world, in that the father of the nuclear navy, Admiral Hyman G. Rickover, a most remarkable individual and definitely worth your while doing some research on. Rickover wanted to build a rather specialist nuclear submarine for essentially deep water espionage, and to hide the program, to keep it in the black budgets, you couldn't give the thing a name. If they'd tried naming her the USS anything, they'd have had to have gone through the usual Congress procedures and alerted the world to the existence of the vessel. So by referring to her as Nuclear NR-1, which I guess means Nuclear Research 1, they were able to hide the building of a small nuclear submarine somewhere in the budget overruns for other programs. And NR-1 went on to provide many, many years of service to both the intelligence community in retrieving objects from the seafloor, and also for scientific research. The well-known US oceanographer, Dr. Bob Ballard, was also a US Naval Reserve officer, and did many missions on board the NR-1. And in later years, she was even used for doing some marine archaeological work in the Black Sea. You'll notice in the cutaway drawing on the right-hand side there that she even has retractable forward and aft wheels. The NR-1 would move along on the seabed to carry out her missions. So, sticking with the early 1960s, we're now up to the Gerry Anderson era, and Stingray was actually the first UK television series filmed entirely in colour. This was so it could be exported to US markets. And the submarine Stingray, like many of the technologies used in the Gerry Anderson show, she was nuclear powered. She had advanced propulsion systems. There's even, you can just about see on the left-hand side of the hull, see the little sort of bubble type affair? That was a small scooter type submersible that could be deployed from Stingray to go off and do other missions. So she was designed to be a high-speed vehicle. Late 2040s is the timeline. And the Gerry Anderson shows always used to come out with all these marvelous books full of cutaways and very, very improbable technical specifications. This particular one here, the World Aquanaut Security Patrol's fastest, most up-to-date submarine, Stingray, capable of achieving staggering speeds of 600 knots underwater and 400 knots on the surface. I suspect you couldn't really do that, but it helped get the imagination of a young Steve, or indeed a young many other marine scientists, engineers, and technologists, to find out more about how could we actually build these things for real when we grew up. And so it did inspire us. And we'll see even the enemies of the World Aquanaut Security Patrol, the species led by a leader called Titan, who had these strange submarines they refer to as terror fish. Funny how the bad guys are always the terrorists, aren't they? I suppose from their perspective, we might be the bad guys. But the submarine, the terror fish, would be launched to pursue and give general hassle to poor old Stingray throughout the series. She's also quoted with an improbable high speed there. Looks like 550 knots top speed. So again, I suspect that's not really achievable with a hull form like that. The Gerry Anderson universe would often have these elaborate headquarter bases as well. And there's a nice cutaway here from that particular book of the Marineville headquarters of the World Aquanaut Security Patrol, which includes the pens for the deployment and recovery of the submarine, so they can be deployed straight into the ocean through underwater tunnels. Perhaps Gerry Anderson's greatest and most popular series was Thunderbirds, and in Thunderbirds, Thunderbird 4 was the submarine, piloted invariably by Gordon Tracy, one of the many puppets used in these series, and she would be deployed from usually Pod 4 of the Thunderbird 2 transport aircraft to carry out a great variety of missions. I had a toy one of these myself, age sort of 4 or 5, spent many happy hours imagining myself piloting Thunderbird 4, rescuing people, righting wrongs, and discovering what lay underneath the surface of the ocean. You'll notice in all of these Gerry Anderson shows, they often have these underwater, what appear to be sequences filmed underwater with, perhaps fish in the foreground and a few bubbles blowing around the place. Interestingly, all they did for these filming slots was they actually had a double wall layer of glass, just perhaps a foot thick, that had the bubbles and the fish in it, and the real action was filmed with regular puppets and model machines swinging around on wires the other side of the double glass layer. So nothing actually got wet, despite the appearances of the film. The later UFO series came out at the end of the 60s, quite a dark series. You know, I suppose people died in just about every episode, with aliens invading the Earth to harvest us for our body parts. And part of the Earth's defenses in UFO was this wonderful machine, Skydiver. Again, a sort of exotic, futuristic thinking design, a combination of an aircraft and nuclear submarine. So you have the aircraft component at the front, submarine at the aft end. Skydiver would be patrolling the world's oceans. Presumably there was more than one skydiver. Difficult to cover planetary defense otherwise. But Skydiver would be out there. A call would come in saying that a UFO had re-entered the Earth's atmosphere somewhere where Skydiver was on patrol, and the submarine would rotate to about 45 degrees. The captain would climb through a tube into the forward half where the aircraft was, and it would be blasted up into the air to go and shoot down that pesky flying saucer before it caused too much trouble. The other stuff that was happening during the 60s were films such as Fantastic Voyage, a very, very popular film at the time. And the basic storyline was a submarine and its crew are miniaturized to a scale where they could be injected inside the body of I think he was meant to be a scientist or a senior politician, somebody who had I think he had a blood clot on the brain, something like that. And they needed, perhaps as we think of nano probes today, they wanted to send a team of specialists, miniaturized, swim around inside his body, and then use their laser devices to remove the pesky clot. The submarine was called the Proteus. And again, futuristic design, ducted fan kind of propulsion. There's a scene where I think the body's immune system starts to try and attack the submarine, and they're having problems with, strands of biological material trying to block the water intakes, which they have to unplug during the mission. Good film, good film. It addresses quite a lot of technology questions, as well. So if you can lay aside the improbability you've been able to miniaturize people in the first place, and of course, what happens about their mass? Do they still weigh 70, 80 kilos? Imagine all these tiny, tiny miniaturized people, super dense, flying around inside your body. But never mind. On a very similar theme, in 1987, an almost identical scenario was used for the film Inner Space, of a small machine. She's almost like a work-class ROV, but with a human pilot inside, played by Dennis Quaid, that's been miniaturized and injected into the body of the. I think it's I can't remember the name of the actor now, but there's lots of it's a much more comedic film than Fantastic Voyage, and Martin Short. I think Martin Short was the comedian, and he's got this small submarine rolling around inside his body. Marine Boy comes along as well in the 1960s. I just about remember this one. It was a Japanese animated series, Japanese anime. I think it came out in 1965 in Japan, and was re-released 1968 through to 69 for Western audiences. And Marine Boy would undertake various adventures, as usual, saving the world. To breathe underwater, he chewed oxygen gum, which would release oxygen so that he could breathe and carry out his missions. Similar plot device had been used in the Gerry Anderson world in Fireball XL5, except there they were chewing oxygen gum for astronauts so that they could breathe in space. They didn't seem to need spacesuits either, which was jolly useful for them. Now, the 60s, of course, was also the era of the Cold War. James Bond movies, The Man from U.N.C.L.E., spy shows galore. And in the movies, we'll have a look at Bond in just a moment. But you had other films that had a lot of underwater technology content. Ice Station Zebra, or Zebra, depending how you pronounce it, was one of the first, which depicted in quite a realistic manner the method of a nuclear submarine being able to explore under Arctic ice, to break through that ice and surface for them to conduct their mission to take on the dastardly enemy on the surface. Bear in mind, this was only a few years after it had been done for real on the USS Nautilus. It was quite an ambitious film based on the novel by Maclean, isn't it? Yes, yeah, very, very good book. So let's give you a gaggle of Bond movies, because if you want to see movies that will give you snapshots of the best and most effective of underwater technology at the time, Bond movies are often the place to look for them. Now, the first of the Bonds, and in fairness, nearly all James Bond movies will have at least one scene where he's in scuba diving equipment or doing something underwater. But there are 3 or 4 of the movies that feature underwater activity as a very central part of the plot. The first of these is Thunderball from 1965. Filmed using the Ivan Tors studio in Miami, the guy we mentioned earlier with Sea Hunt and Flipper. And there were multiple examples of underwater technology used in this. So here we have a self-propulsion unit for the human diver. You'll notice none of these guys are wearing any adjustable buoyancy. The modern buoyancy jacket hadn't yet been invented. So all of these scenes where you'll see the good guys who conveniently are all in kind of orange and the bad guys are conveniently all in black, are having a good old fight under the water there. They're having to use spear guns and knives and blades in order to chop at each other. In this particular film, they're not using underwater guns, although such things do exist in today's world. But a careful viewing of Thunderball is absolutely great if you want to have a look at what was the state of the art of underwater technology circa 1965. You have swimmer delivery vehicles, you have diver propulsion devices. There is pretty much everything that was available at the time, so worth a watch. One of the best of the Bond movies as well. Now, the other classic Bond for underwater scenes is, of course, The Spy Who Loved Me, with the famous Lotus Esprit that dives into the sea. I think it's off Sardinia. Well, of course, realistically, in probably a tank at Pinewood. And the team, it was Perry Oceanographic that did a lot of the work on this particular one. The car, they did build diving versions of the Lotus. It wasn't, of course, the real car that carried on being turned into a submarine to perform the underwater mission. At a free flooding hull was made, more than one of the Lotus, and you'd have divers in scuba gear on the inside, piloting the car around the place. See if I can get that one to run. And also you see some rather splendid swimmer delivery vehicles, diver propulsion devices being used to try and capture Bond and his Russian agent colleague in this particular movie as well. See if I can move on to the next one. Now, in terms of advanced underwater tech, perhaps the next one that looks at these things in a great deal of detail is For Your Eyes Only from 1981. This film basically has it all, if you like, your deep underwater technology equipment. We have an armored 1 atmosphere diving suit, a gym suit, that's used in one of the scenes on board the wreck at the bottom of the Aegean. We also have the Mantis and Neptune submersibles, and we also have some Normalair-Garrett. What's the name of the device? I think it's the Dive 500 rebreather devices. We'll see. Let's see if I can find those now. Here we go. Yeah, Normalair-Garrett Deep Dive 500 rebreathers being worn by the stunt man and woman portraying Roger Moore and Carol Bouquet in these films. There's the Neptune submersible that's in the background of this particular shot. And then we have the Mantis submersible from Graham Hawkes. And he also plays the pilot of the Mantis. You'll see a scene where this bespectacled submersible pilot is trying to do unspeakable things to the Neptune device, and I think it gets pushed into deeper water beyond its crush depth in the end. So poor old Graham comes to a sticky end. But the Normalair-Garrett Deep Dive 500s, it was one of many rebreathers that were brought out in the 70s and 80s, not all of which achieved long-term commercial success. The watch aficionados as well will enjoy that the two divers are wearing, you can't see it in this shot, but they've got the rather splendid Seiko monocoque titanium, the so-called tuna type watches as well. One of the most unique and innovative of dive watch designs featured in this particular film. Now, Graham Hawkes, who built the Mantis, went on through his company to develop some fantastic machines. Deep Flight, the one on the left-hand side there, fans of Star Trek Enterprise will see Deep Flight doing a barrel roll in the opening sequence, in the music at the start of Enterprise. These are, again, 1 atmosphere submersibles. You don't have to wear a diving suit to work in them, although Hawkes did make one called Wet Flight that was a free flooding device. But basically, Deep Flight has progressed now through to the Super Falcon devices. They're quite different to conventional submarines in that they use the lift from their wings to achieve. Now let me think. I think these things are actually positively buoyant. So the wing, yes, they'd be positively buoyant. So the wings are actually being used to get the down thrust in order to stay deep down. And these machines can, they can roll, they can loop. They're probably one of the only classes of submersible that a sufficiently wealthy person can buy that would let you genuinely swim and fly with marine mammals. Marvelous technology, very expensive, but if you can afford it, you can head off out into the Caribbean and learn how to fly one of these, and even have your very own Deep Flight or Super Falcon vehicle. You'll see the Super Falcons have a safety system as well. The pod, the pilot and the co-pilot sit in. The whole thing can be ejected so that it floats to the surface if the submarine is in trouble down on the seabed. Another first that we saw in a Bond film, this was from Tomorrow Never Dies, was an autonomous underwater vehicle. In this particular case, it was called Sea Drill. It was an AUV that was released from a stealth ship, itself based on a real-life stealth ship, the Sea Shadow. The Bond version is the one up there on the top right. The real-life version, Sea Shadow, is down there on the bottom right. And the Sea Drill would be launched from the stealth ship swim through the ocean, find its target, literally drill a hole in the hull, thereby sinking the ship. So, and that is a key part of the plot. If you find yourself watching Tomorrow Never Dies, again, lots of diving scenes. Splendid model of, I think it's HMS Westminster, Type 23 frigate, teetering on the edge of an underwater precipice before it slides off into deep sea. Now, the mother of all submarine films for the latter half of the 20th century has to be The Hunt for Red October, based on Tom Clancy's 1984 book, not 1084. I need to correct this slide. Starring Sean Connery, and in particular starring the Soviet Typhoon class ballistic missile submarine. Now, for the fictional purposes of The Hunt for Red October, the submarine has been equipped with something they call the Caterpillar drive, which is supposed to be a silent drive, which threatens the balance of power in the Cold War. It is based on a real technology. The Caterpillar drive is supposed to be an electromagneto-hydrodynamic drive. I'll get it right. Let me pause. Okay, I'm back. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Yes, the Caterpillar drive in The Hunt for Red October is based on a concept called the magneto-hydrodynamic drive. It's a real technology, but it's never been proved to work on a large enough scale or fast enough scale to drive a submarine. The idea is by using superconducting magnets in conjunction with the electrical properties of salt water, you're able to produce a drive which basically moves water down, a long tube or pair of tubes in the hull of the submarine and ejects it out the back, and thereby gives you thrust. The concept's a good one, and experimental vessels have been built that have this kind of propulsion, but nobody's ever been able to achieve more than a few knots speed. It's a very slow method of propulsion, but it would be very, very quiet. So who knows, perhaps somebody somewhere out there is trying to build a real world version of this drive that does actually work. It might not be very fast, but if you just simply want very, very quiet propulsion, then perhaps an EMD drive is something that would be achievable in the real world. The other two classes of submarines that feature prominently throughout the Hunt for Red October is the Los Angeles class hunter-killer submarine of the US Navy and the older Soviet Alpha class hunter-killer submarine. The Alphas in the real world were the hot rods of the submarine world, speeds submerged well in excess of 40 knots, well automated designs, all officer crew, not many people on board at all. They're basically underwater interceptors designed to take on carrier battle groups or other enemy submarines. using very high speed and the ability to dive deep. They had titanium hulls as well as these compact but very powerful reactors. And at the time, when they first came out, the Alphas could dive deeper and travel faster than the torpedoes that were available to sink them with. So they did force a step change in NATO underwater technology. The next category of film I'm going to think of here are the, oops, we've gone backwards. Here we go. The thrillers and disaster movies. And these would include the Irwin Allen's Poseidon Adventure. You saw a poster of earlier in the presentation. That particular one was a cruise liner that is capsized by a rogue wave, and the adventures of the passengers and crew in trying to escape from the upturned hull of the Poseidon. On a similar theme, in 1977, we had the Airport 1977 movie. It was part of a franchise of aviation disaster movies, starting off with the original Airport with Van Heflin and Jacqueline Bisset and Dean Martin. It then goes on through Airport 75, where the 747, I think a light aircraft hits the cockpit, sucking out the pilots, and the air hostess has to somehow land the crippled 747. And then in Airport 77, the aircraft, and again a 747 carrying the obligatory passengers who were all sort of Hollywood celebrity types. It's hijacked, it clips an oil platform, it sinks, but it gently ditches in the ocean surface. I think it's down in the Gulf of Mexico, and she settles on the very shallow seabed, and the adventure is again, how are they going to get them out of there? And eventually the hull is found, and we get quite a realistic sequence of US Navy engineers arriving on site to, mount lift bags around the fuselage and help recover the aircraft to the surface. It's got some quite good sections there. In some ways, another similar story, except instead of a sunken aircraft, it's a sunken submarine, was Grey Lady Down, a Charlton Heston, David Carradine, Stacey Keach disaster movie where a nuclear submarine gets hit by a freighter. She's sitting down there on the seabed, 1,450 feet below the surface, and we see the US Navy's then new deep sea rescue vehicles being used to try and rescue the crew, and also a small human occupied vehicle similar to the Alvin or the Turtle being used in the rescue. And of course she gets sacrificed, complete with David Carradine, in the process of saving the larger submarine. So good adventure, introducing people again to all manner of technologies and concepts there. And who can go past the 70s without mentioning Jaws from 1975? Not a lot of technology in there, apart from the Richard Dreyfuss character who plays the marine biologist, demonstrating the technology he has on board his private boat. And The Deep, which was a very, very popular film. Again, Robert Shaw, who had been in Jaws as well. Jacqueline Bisset, who of course had previously been in Airport, and Nick Nolte. A film very much based around scuba diving, but also around wrecks carrying narcotics and things like that. So a good old salty adventure film, but not really very strong on the underwater technology front. There's always been a genre of underwater horror movies, not usually any good, and in most instances not really much of a success at the box office either. People seem to prefer their monsters in space to in the sea, but it can be done. So we had in 1989 gave us Deep Star 6 and Leviathan, and one of the members of Society for Underwater Technology Mike Sears was one of the divers that worked on Leviathan. As recently as 2019, we had much more success with a film called The Meg, with Jason Statham and co, some giant shark, again portraying all manner of underwater technology as they come across the unfeasibly large prehistoric shark that's lurking around at the bottom of the ocean in that particular film. But there was a 1989 film that was very successful and actually showed in many ways the cutting edge of the kind of underwater technology that was becoming available at the time of filming and beyond. The Abyss from James Cameron was, unlike Leviathan or Deep Star 6, a very successful film. It had a famously complicated filming process. They managed to find an unfinished nuclear power station and basically flooded the pressure vessel there for all the filming sequences. They had a roof covering of black painted ping pong balls so that you could film all the time, but if anything went wrong, somebody would still be able to break through the ping pong balls and get to the surface. The film featured a seafloor drilling platform, deep core. The divers, for the purpose of the plot, were all meant to be in saturation. We had large human-occupied vehicles, flatbed and cab one, and a whole fleet of remote-operated vehicles and other advanced underwater technologies. So here we see a couple of clips. Here's the divers retrieving. These are supposed to be nuclear warheads off Trident missiles on board the sunken, I think she's the USS Montana, for the purposes of the drama. Something very annoying that this film and various other ones do is this silly concept having lights on the inside of the helmets. I mean, come on, people. We all know you can't see out if you've got lights on in the inside of the helmets, but it's necessary, I suppose, so the audience can see which actor is inside the suit. You see this all the time in space movies too. I think Alien was the first culprit to do it with these internally illuminated hats, and now everybody does it. It's daft because you wouldn't do that in the real world. The other thing you notice with this, they're all meant to be using high-tech rebreathers, but you can see bubbles. Bubbles tend to get added to filming, even with systems that don't generate bubbles, simply because they film better. I think it's a cinematographic thing, if that's the right word. The other thing you'll see here, which again reflects reality and in many ways prefigured it, is the idea of the human diver going around doing her thing. In this case, it's Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, and she has a small eyeball class ROV following her around while she does her work down there on the seabed, so that she can see, or rather her colleagues back on the underwater drilling platform can monitor her safety and see what she's up to. Good film. Now, one of the things the Abyss is perhaps well known for is the use of liquid breathing technology. Now, in all of the cuts I've seen of this film in its European edition, we don't see the rat breathe the fluid, but I'm told by those who have seen the uncut edition that you do actually see the rat immersed into this fluorocarbon fluid, super oxygenated fluid, which does actually let you breathe when you're immersed in water. Here's the famous scene, in goes the rat. So in our European cut, we don't see the rat actually breathing in the liquid, but it's real technology. Such fluids do exist. They're very, very, very hard work to use in real life. Here we go, out comes rat, which apparently in the full version of the film has indeed just been immersed in the fluid. And here's the scene later on in the movie where Ed Harris has to go down and defuse a nuclear warhead that's going to blow up a bunch of aliens down there on the bottom of the Cayman Trough. And here he goes. He's not actually breathing fluid for the purpose of the filming. He's holding his breath, but it looks pretty effective and actually pretty scary. The technology has been tested. It is feasible in a human being. You can breathe liquid, but you need a pump. Your lung muscles aren't strong enough the muscles around your rib cage aren't strong enough to be able to breathe fluid in and out. You need a bit of help, and you would probably need to be anesthetized to be able to start the process off, because obviously you're going to you're going to drown. You'll stay alive because the fluid is oxygenated, but your body will think you're drowning when it goes in. So the real world application is very much for the treatment of burns victims, people who've got burned insides of lungs, and also for highly premature babies. You could potentially immerse people, or have their lungs filled with these oxygenated fluids so that they're able to survive. Perhaps a treatment for severely ill COVID patients as well, who knows. And in the future, maybe for incubation outside the womb, if we're building artificial womb technologies, or for hibernation in spaceflight. So who knows, there may well turn out to be a real world application for liquid breathing technology. It's not really that effective for human divers. You wouldn't be able to communicate. And even if you're breathing fluids, remember, your body has other void spaces. You have your sinuses and other places that would still, you'd probably have to fill them with fluids or gels as well if you wanted to go super deep by having these fluid-filled cavities. Even Star Wars managed to get a little bit of submersible action into there. Episode 1, you have the Bongo submarine going off to the Gungan city. And the Jedi have their breathing apparatus, a mouth-held breather, which is a common theme in science fiction. We've seen it in some Bond films as well, this idea of little things you could just plug straight into your mouth to do your breathing. Moving swiftly ahead, we're nearly at the end now. Here's an example, SeaQuest DSV, standing for Deep Submergence Vehicle, from 1993 to 1996. A beautiful, organically shaped sort of biomimetic submarine design with all kinds of remote sensors and AUVs and ROVs. The remote sensors would be referred to as whiskers in the purpose of the film. And in at least the initial series, oceanographer Bob Ballard would appear at the end of the show to give a summary of the science that had been used throughout the episode. So one of these series started off good and then kind of went down the aliens and everything sci-fi mode, but at least introduce the audience to some quite advanced underwater technology concepts. And almost my last slide. James Cameron's going to be back December 2022 now with the second of the Avatar movies. And I managed to find a couple of shots showing the actors taking part in their motion capture work in pools in various places in the United States. There's going to be a strong underwater theme in the second of the Avatar movies. Cameron, of course, went on to the dive the Challenger deep in his purpose-built submersible vessel. So he's a real life enthusiast for deep diving and has done some amazing things which he wants to bring back. And in fact, he'll be using some of the footage that he took in his deep dives on his own submersible in the future Avatar movies. So my conclusion, underwater technology in fiction, film, and television, it inspires, it entertains, and often educates. We have SUT members who are fully part of the movie industry. It's one of those niches you can be in. And there's very much a place in our industry for people who want to turn their dreams into reality. And just by way of a final slide, I didn't know about this until quite recently. Even Star Trek manages to get an underwater theme. I know there's been a bit of diving in some of the movies, but it turns out that's a quick snapshot. It's a blueprint of the Enterprise D, the version of the ship used in the Next Generation. And it actually has an area that was labeled in the blueprints as cetacean operations. And it seems that Roddenberry envisaged that the future crew of the Enterprise would include some intelligent marine mammals as well. So who knows what their job would be on board, but there are indeed marine mammal tanks on board the Enterprise D. Well, what a shame we never saw those portrayed in any of the movies. So I'm going to end that one there. Thank you very much for joining, and we'll look forward to seeing you all again in 2 weeks for the next of our public webinars. Thanks. Bye for now.